While we continue to monitor the situation in Pensacola, Democratic presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg is unveiling his signature gun control policy.
The former New York City mayor announced his plan yesterday in Aurora, Colorado. And joining us now to discuss it further is senior advisor for Michael Bloomberg's 2020 campaign, Tim O'Brien, and he joins us now from Pittsburgh. So, Tim, this is probably pretty appropriate because we've been spending much of the morning covering a active shooter situation on a military base there in Pensacola, Florida. So, as we've sort of been covering, so let's talk a little bit more about Bloomberg's plan and how does he plan to accomplish the goals that lawmakers have been unable to do, which is to reduce these sort of situations like what we've seen, active shooter situations and other situations in which guns are used in dangerous ways.
I'll remind you, too, there was a shooter on the military base in Pearl Harbor.
Just
recently,
last
too.
week. Yeah, that's right.
So this is unfortunately becoming a very frequent event. I think that Mike Bloomberg is the only candidate right now in play who has got a lifelong commitment to dealing with the scourge of gun violence in the United States. He has put his time and energy into this, both as a public official and as a philanthropist. There's a demonstrable track record about trying to take on gun control head on and to really break the back of the NRA and its sort of pernicious influence it's had on public policymaking. Mike specifically has a whole programmatic approach to this. You can go to MikeBloomberg.com for a very detailed explanation of it. But some of the highlights are improved background checks, permitting, identification from buyers about their age, whether or not they've had issues around domestic violence or mental health issues that would make it inappropriate for them to carry a gun. And I think first and foremost, a real ban on assault weapons. And it's a whole menu of options that he would enact, put into law to just wrestle this problem to the ground once and for all. We've been plagued in this country by kids going to schools where they don't know if they have to hide under desks to protect themselves from an active shooter, or people going into houses of worship. I'm in Pittsburgh right now, where a synagogue was the scene of one of the most horrific, acts of gun violence and murder in the country. And Mike Bloomberg is fed up with it. He knows how to tackle this. He has a broad national network that he built long before he decided to run for president, and he's going to take guns on.
Tim, a lot of the other, in fact, all of the other candidates vying for the nomination have plans to put into place for guns and for gun control and for gun measures. So on paper is one thing, but getting it through Congress is another. What makes Mayor Bloomberg believe that he's the guy who's going to be able to do what not one single president has been able to do since perhaps Bill Clinton?
Yeah. Because many of those ideas are ideas we've heard before.
Right.
Well, but there's a huge difference here. Mike Bloomberg's plans aren't just on paper like the other candidates. Mike Bloomberg has gotten laws passed in other states to limit the presence and proliferation of guns. This isn't a pipe dream. This isn't a bag of promises. This is a man who tactically knows how you take on the gun lobby at both the federal and state levels, and he doesn't do it single-handedly. He's done it through a coalition of supporters who understand how to tackle this problem. So I think he's going to come into the White House not just camera ready to deal with this problem, but policy ready. He knows how to ram that through. He has the courage and the principles to take on the forces behind guns, and he's got a track record that you can look at. There's no other candidate right now in the field who can compare to Michael Bloomberg on gun control.
When we first looked at the crop of candidates running for the Democratic Party, much had been made about the amount of diversity, the most diverse group that we've seen ever. And now, increasingly, what we're seeing happening is the diversity is being lost. And particularly when we look at the top candidates, there's almost no diversity at all, right? So now enter in an older white guy who's a billionaire. We've got two older white guys who are billionaires, but you're representing one of them. Why is it time for another older billionaire white guy?
Well, I think portraying Mike Bloomberg as an older billionaire white guy is cartoonish, and it doesn't really respect who he is in the totality of his life and career. Mike Bloomberg was born into very modest circumstances in a small town in Massachusetts. His father was an accountant for a dairy company. Mike Bloomberg paid his way through college with student loans, working as a parking lot attendant. He got fired from his first big job on Wall Street. The money that he got as part of that severance, he used to build into a multi-billion-dollar company. Unlike Donald Trump, Mike Bloomberg has not a dime of inherited wealth. He built his company from scratch with his own money. After that, he could have sat back on his laurels and just enjoyed his wealth. But no, he decided to be a public servant and ran for mayor of New York and successfully administered a city that is bigger than most states for 3 successive terms. And once again, he's deciding to enter the fray politically because he believes that Donald Trump is a threat to a whole series of values and institutions that the United States has historically depended on to make our country unique. And that's what's pulled him into this race, not just his wealth. And the other thing I think about, when we think about his money, there's a long and very honorable tradition in this country of people with resources deciding to enter public service. George Washington, Franklin Roosevelt, John Kennedy. So I don't think that wealth in and of itself should preclude someone from serving. And again, I would point to the fact that he's not in this because of his wealth. He's in this because he's a problem solver and a job creator who has a proven track record as a public leader.
But his wealth has offered him the ability to circumvent at least a portion of the vetting process here. He's not going to be on the debate stage. He hasn't been going from state to state to state like some of the other candidates. He doesn't have to prove that he can raise money from a wide platform.
Well, I don't think Mike has circumvented the vetting process because I'm sitting here answering these questions. He'll answer them too. These are good, important questions that you're asking. There's not a question about his tenure, his policies, or his character that our campaign won't answer honestly and head on. So he will be subject to extensive vetting. He already has. He's got a public career and a public record that are open for vetting. So this doesn't amount to him, I think, circumventing vetting in any shape. I think the other thing that people should focus on is he's never taken public money for any of his campaigns, including for mayor. And when he arrived in office as the mayor of New York, he wasn't beholden to special interests. And every voter in this country who understands that Washington is shackled by gridlock and special interests, and Washington, the swamp that Donald Trump planned to drain and then only filled it with bigger alligators, is something Mike Bloomberg can go into, be completely liberated from special interests, and can actually serve the needs of the American people.
So, Tim, let me ask you a question that I find it might be on the mind of a lot of folks. When Mayor Bloomberg was on,
I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Oh, okay, great. When Mayor Bloomberg was on CBS This Morning a few months back, he was asked if he intended to run for the presidency, and he said from where he stood and what he was looking at in terms of the landscape, he didn't see a path to the nomination. Knowing Mayor Bloomberg, having followed his career with some interest even before he was mayor of New York, I know that he's a data-driven guy. He's a guy who looks at numbers and he looks at data and he crunches all that and he makes decisions based on opportunities that may not seem, that may not appear to perhaps folks who are not as data-driven as he is. So between that time he was on CBS the last time and yesterday when he spoke to Gail, or when he announced that he was running for president, specifically, what has the mayor seen that has compelled him to take a stab at this nomination? What does he see as his path forward today that he didn't see a few months ago?
That's such a great and important question. I think, earlier this year, I think he felt the Democrats had a field of candidates who were going to be able to bring the battle to Donald Trump and could offer voters a very clear and confident alternative to the Trump presidency. As I mentioned earlier, I think Mike Bloomberg sees Trump as a scourge, and he wanted to back anybody in the Democratic Party who could take him on. I think as the year wore on and the candidates spoke more frequently and directly about policy and their intentions and how they saw the battle against Trump, Mike lost confidence that there was a field of people who could beat him and could specifically beat him in the 6 or 7 states that I think are really going to determine the outcome of this election. States like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Arizona, where I will remind you, Trump is campaigning very hard. There are not any other Democrats on the ground in those states. Mike Bloomberg is already up and running in those states because he knows the battle has to be brought to Trump's doorstep. And I think he felt, based on his own experience, based on his abilities, based on his commitment to taking on big fights, that he could fight Donald Trump on his own ground, toe-to-toe, in a way the other candidates couldn't. And that's why he ultimately decided to get into the race.
You know, with the candidates that we're seeing now, the ones that are left in the race, there are still sort of some centrist and some sort of more left-leaning candidates. What gap was he thinking that he could fill? What was missing?
Well, Mike Bloomberg is a fiscal moderate. Mike Bloomberg is socially liberal on a lot of issues that are important to progressives, including the criminal justice system, gun control, the environment. He is very observant about national security, and he's also a coalition builder. And I think what the Democrats have to realize here is whether Democrats are progressives or moderates, that there's a shared tissue of values that Democrats have always embraced in this country around tolerance, community, progress, and innovation that Donald Trump threatens, and that Democrats have much more to gain by uniting around those themes and behind the one candidate that can beat Trump rather than to divide themselves from each other and lose to Trump. And I don't think there's any candidate that can unite the party around as many issues that are dear, I think, to the values and the hearts of Democrats as Mike Bloomberg.
All right, so let me do a couple of questions to you about some of those issues to get where Mayor Bloomberg stands on them. What is his position on health care in America? Would President Bloomberg try to keep intact the Affordable Care Act?
I think Michael Bloomberg sees the Affordable Care Act as a signature achievement of the Obama administration and a building block to broader health care for all Americans who need it. I think we are the wealthiest, most prosperous country in the world, and it is a public policy failure that all of our citizens aren't protected by quality health care coverage. The Trump administration has done nothing on health care coverage other than try to undermine the Affordable Care Act. What Mike Bloomberg wants to do is build on the public option and make sure that any American who needs health care at an affordable rate can get it. At the same time, he does not want to take away private care from people who are privately insured. He does not want to take away private insurance from people who are privately insured as part of that solution. But for those who need it, for those who are feeling lost and are worried about the well-being of their kids or what's going to happen to them if they lose a job, Mike Bloomberg wants to make sure there's a strong social safety net around health care that takes care of those sorts of Americans.
Where does Mayor Bloomberg stand on immigration? What would be his comprehensive plan to fix what many people, both Democrats and Republicans, see as something that needs fixing, our immigration policy in the United States?
Mike Bloomberg is the grandson of Eastern European immigrants. He understands that immigration is the lifeblood of the United States. We have benefited from the fact that diverse people have come to our shores, have come from other countries, and lent their skills and hard work to this country. We benefit from immigration just as much as immigrants benefit from being in the United States. He believes in immigration. He believes that the solution to the reality of the southern border is more vigilant supervision of immigration, but certainly not a ban on immigration like Trump has tried to do, certainly not building a wall. That wall symbolizes just how malicious and dangerous the Trump administration is when it tries to approach serious public policy solutions that demand both a heart and a mind. And they fail on both sides of that.
Tim.
And that's not Mike Bloomberg. He'll never build a wall on the southern border. He'll make sure the southern border is effectively supervised, but he'll ensure that no migrants who cross that border are separated from their families and put in cages, that no migrants who approach that border have to worry that they might be shot at, and that he'll also address the cause of the migration that we're seeing from Central America and elsewhere in Latin America, which is our neighbors are struggling with poverty, corruption, and lawlessness. And they need the United States to be a strong policy partner with them throughout Latin America so we can actually solve some of the immigration problem at its root.
Tim, before we let you go, we got about 30 seconds. Climate change. What is the mayor's policy on climate change? First of all, basic question. I know it's crazy, but I got to ask you, does he believe that climate change is real?
Oh, come on. Mike Bloomberg understands that climate change is one of the biggest existential threats of our life. You will not find anybody in Mike Bloomberg's campaign, and you will never hear from Mike Bloomberg himself that climate science is witchcraft, which unfortunately a huge portion of the GOP and Trump himself revels in saying. If we don't tackle climate change right now, our children's futures are going to be endangered at the most basic level. The quality of our air, the quality of the water we drink are all under threat. And again, we talked about this with gun control. These aren't just promises from Mike Bloomberg. Mike Bloomberg is
Tim, we're going to lose your shot,
for helping take about.
We're going to lose your shot, so thank you very much for responding to that. That was just sort of a key. No. We're just going to push it to the max. So your window's going to drop. So we're going to say thank you very much for appearing with us. We appreciate it greatly. Thank you so much.